Kia ora, hello. Last week we discussed the creation of our new impression. We're still frantically working away at that and hope to have it done in time. If you've not watched that one, pop over and watch it now to catch up. Once we have completed our projects, you can be sure we will have as many pictures posted all over our Instagrams, Facebooks and whatnot. This week we are going to discuss the process of building this impression in a more esoteric sense. When building an impression, at least from a late medieval perspective, we need to rely on art to build our impressions. Sometimes we have the benefits of archaeological finds, however, these often do not include textiles or full garments, which is also an issue. Some of the other themes we are going to discuss is the representation of art and symbolic language in medieval Europe, the Canterbury Tales, and finally my crippling self-doubt when it comes to building an impression, so stick around for that one. I know, I have promised a whole video on the representation of art and symbolic language in the medieval period. This sits in my pile of shame of incomplete scripts. This is what you'll get for now. That is a whole series in itself, and really we have so many other incomplete series that I want to close those up first before I start on a brand new one. Now, I'm done justifying myself. On to the point. In brief, medieval culture relied on the communication of ideas via symbols and allegory, unlike the modern person who often has a literal interpretation of media. So for us, in the context of the lion, for example, the animal of the lion is just a lion. While for the medieval person, the lion was a symbol of the king of the beasts, and that in itself is an allegory for Jesus. In Christian allegory, the lion has three natures, each have a meaning. The lion was said to sweep its tracks away with its tail. This represents the way Jesus concealed his divinity, only revealing himself to his followers. It was believed to sleep with its eyes open. This represented Jesus physically dead after crucifixion, but spiritually alive in his divine nature. When seen roaring over its dead cubs to bring them to life, this represents how God the Father woke Jesus after 3 days in his tomb. There are other morals and symbols associated with the lion, which if you're interested, as with all medieval beasts, you can easily look up, and there's a link below in the description. As with all of our links, they are below. We also find symbolism represented in depictions of the saints, to identify the viewer that the image or statue they are viewing is a saint. In the context of the pilgrimage, we see St. James, often depicted as a pilgrim himself. As an apostle, he was said to have been charged with the conversion of Hispania by Jesus. On his martyrdom, his body was returned to Hispania. However, when taking this body to shore, it fell into the ocean. One of his followers prayed, and the body floated to the surface and was covered in scallop shells. James is then depicted with the scallop shell on his person. This also becoming the symbol for pilgrims, not only to his shrine. We also see St. James depicted with the trappings of the pilgrim, the hat, the staff, the scrip, and depending on the period, the mantle and or garter-robe. So we look to St. James, his dress, to reflect that of the allegorical figure, then this dress to reflect not so much the cultural practice, but the symbolism of the character. The context is that when I am to view St. James, in the medieval mind, I go, ah yes, hat, scrip, staff, scallop shell, yes, I've got it. I understand the meaning is St. James. I understand the moral of the story. Good, I've got it. The modernist literal interpretation of art goes, oh, look, here's this man. What is he wearing? He can only exist in this state as it is presented, stripped of all higher meaning. While the postmodernist interpretation gives an individual and existential interpretation of the piece. The art can mean different things to each of us. The original intention of the creator does not matter. This is why context of the art is of the highest importance. That is, when using any art from the medieval period, we must try to understand the symbology. This informs us more about the work than the what is being depicted. So, let's discuss the development of the imagery of the pilgrim. By the 1100s, Christ is depicted as a pilgrim, wearing scrip with a scallop shell on it. And in the 1300s, the disciples are depicted as pilgrims with purses and staffs when meeting Christ in religious dramas. In the 14th century, I discussed referring to both Canterbury Tales and Piers Plowman last week, and descriptions of the pilgrim in both these works. Chaucer does not appear to garb his pilgrims in what I'm referring to as the uniform of the pilgrim, while when we look at Langland's Piers Plowman, the pilgrim does appear to be garbed in this uniform. The pilgrims in Chaucer are riding. So why have a staff? Was the staff only used by those that walked? Well, Chaucer does write, "They set their signs upon their heads, and some upon their cap." This could readily be thought as either a pilgrim badge, or most likely a scallop shell. Yet, beside this, as mentioned, we do not hear of staffs or scrips. In Piers Plowman, the scrip, hat, staff, and badges are all mentioned. So the question is, what is true? Is this all to be treated as allegory? If we refer to the pilgrim image in Romain Leroux's, this is allegory, right? The pilgrim is to be clearly identifiable as a pilgrim with all accessories. There is a caveat here, because people start to get all mad and yell at me when I bring this up. Yes, you can use art. And I want to say again, you can use art. The point is, we need to know the context. As I have said before, the medieval art is great to be used as a visual guide. This image here, for example, it shows me how I can use a cord for my pilgrim hat. It even has a toggle. How good is that? Do I need to know the context? No, but yes, well, it's difficult and we need to get to that because nothing exists in a vacuum. If we cannot fully trust art, then maybe we need to turn to burials. Burials are also problematic, as often a burial will not be representative of daily fashion. Instead, these will be grave goods and shrouds, and sometimes, as I like to phrase, Sunday best. If we were to do, for example, an archaeological survey of clothing of middle-aged men in the West of the last 40 years, most graves will result in finds that the most common clothing found would be a suit. As is the tradition to bury men in their suits, sure, the fashion of the suit changes, but it is still a suit. I can assure you, I only wear a suit to job interviews, weddings, and funerals. Now, I know there are outliers, however, this is just a look at trends and data analysis. This is where we can get ourselves stuck in making assumptions. We cannot assume just because these finds were of people in suits does not mean that is what people wore in their daily life. And is the cultural norm. Well, that's really important as well. So where does the truth lie? What do I do to create an accurate impression? As with all things, I think the truth lies somewhere in between. That if we look to the archaeological records, that until the 16th century at least, we have little evidence of a full pilgrim's uniform. I suspect that this may be due to the increasing popularity of the cult of St. James during this period. However, I've only done cursory research into this in the last 3 weeks or so since picking up the subject. If any viewers have more to add on the subject, please comment below. I would love to know more. It is during this period that we do have the garb of Stephen Prawn, which is dated to 1571. I know that Pilgrim guides recommended full waterproof capes and robes and extra shoes and bags for travel prior to this period. We see this book started appearing in and around the 11th and 12th centuries. In the late medieval period, the symbology of the staff, the ampule, had become synonymous with the pilgrimage. We also know that the collection and display of badges of pilgrimage on clothing was well established by this time. So popular was the purchase of pilgrim badges at sites that many locations would sell out of their stock, which was in the thousands, in the first day. For those of you who have stayed around through this, I really feel that I cannot make a solid argument here. I'm struggling to commit, and I don't like making claims without evidence. This is where I have crippling self-doubt. Do I recreate a manuscript image, knowing that many of these images are not to be a realistic depiction? Or do I rely on the Canterbury Tales, a work of satire? I was forced to make a decision, one I'm not comfortable with, yet makes sense. We array ourselves as pilgrims with staffs and hats and scrips. At the same time, I believe that this uniform, at least, was not ubiquitous for the late medieval period. I also believe that many people who undertook the pilgrimage did so in whatever travelling clothes that they had available to them, although I do not have sufficient evidence to present that here to make a cogent argument. What has happened though, in an attempt to communicate to others in the reenactment community that we are reenacting pilgrims, we have assumed the very symbology in our costume. I wonder how often we do this in our impressions without thinking about it. This is a thought I would love to explore later because this video is already very long. What do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts on the subject. Hi, you're still here. That means you enjoyed the video. Remember, like, comment and subscribe. And stay safe, have fun, and keep reenacting.